When Alan Bennett published An Uncommon Reader in March of 2007, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were both still very much alive and ruling England. In addition, Prince William still had hair, and him and Kate Middleton were a month away from their big breakup. But Alan Bennett's An Uncommon Reader was a surprising little novella that I found recently, and I wanted something lighter to read after reading Antibodies and Blood Music back to back, and it seemed, for lack of a better word, quaint. It was a nice little French flap, deckled edge, tiny little book. But in 120 pages, it actually caused me to think a little bit more than I had anticipated. The overall story is kind of whimsical if you think about it, and very unserious. The premise of the plot is the Queen finds a mobile library at the palace and goes down to check it out because her corgis have, of course, run away from her. The Queen's penchant for corgis is well regarded and well known. And so she was following them as they were running amok, and she comes across this mobile library outside the kitchens and endeavors to go inside, and due to being a polite sovereign, pretends to take interest and feels like she must do her duty and check out a book at this mobile library. Well, because the Queen checked out a book, she must do the right thing and read the book. And that's what she did. And thus starts the Queen upon reading. The thought that the Queen of England never read for enjoyment or wouldn't have time to do it with all of her varying government responsibilities is fair. I would figure as someone as well educated as her would have had to have some knowledge and or at least read some of the classics. But Alan Bennett in this book premises that wasn't really something she did or remembered doing. You know, Queen Elizabeth did experience the joy of a very long life. So, in An Uncommon Reader, Alan Bennett creates the story of what if the Queen of England rediscovered reading later in life and just becomes a passionate and avid devourer of books. And through her reading, she discovers what it's like to really have a hobby, and what it's like to be consumed by a passion or a hobby in this case, and how both invigorating reading can be. And the reason why I say I'm surprised by this little novella is, despite it being only 120 pages, and despite the premise of the actual book being so inane, it did actually make me think about reading as a whole. Reading as a whole is an escape. It can be an escape depending on what you are reading of your own life. You can go off on spaceships and science fiction. You can explore the world of magic and dragons and fairies. You can have the smuttiest romance life ever, even though maybe you yourself are actually ace. Can be a thoroughly selfish and engaging and consuming hobby. And while it exposes you to worlds, and if you are a reader of nonfiction, will allow you to learn just about anything you want to learn, it can also be isolating because you are one person reading one book. Some of you at a time, some like me are reading multiple books at the same time, but it's still very much a isolated hobby. And then the Queen's discovery of this and interactions of this makes her kind of shirk her duties a little bit as Queen, But, you know, she's the queen, so what are you going to do? But in her actions with others, as she's going through her regal duties, she asks them, do you read? How much that can either be a conversation starter or a conversation killer, depending on if one, that person reads, or two, if they read the same thing you do. I don't know how many times I have had a conversation because, you know, I do buy, sell, and collect books. I am also a reader. You know, when someone finds out what I do, they ask me, okay, what are you reading? And I tell them, and they have no idea about any of the books I'm talking about. I try, you know, talking about my tattoos. People ask me about my tattoos, and I'm like, it's this book, this book, this book, and this book. And they're like, uh-huh, because they've never heard of any of those authors. Even Ray Bradbury, which is considered a classic piece of literature and a classic piece of science fiction, as well as a prolific and well-known classic writer. Some people don't even know. This tattoo is the only one out of all of them that people normally will recognize the author. Even if I find or have a conversation with another avid reader, if we don't read the same genres, it's hard to continue a conversation because both of us are so passionate about a thing, and it's hard to find a common ground in there. And the reason why I liked this book and was surprised by the fact that it's so short and yet I was still able to get a depth of thought that I wasn't expecting out of it is how could I be a better ambassador for reading? I mean, I do have a YouTube channel. I do talk about the books I read, but not just here, but how could I maybe entice other people to read? I definitely will talk to death about any of the books on my tattoos, but how can I maybe bridge that gap between people that read different genres? Like, what questions could I ask that would maybe bring someone in versus alienate them? Like, you know, someone is a reader of, you know, Dean Koontz, or someone who really likes reading, who's is it Abby Jimenez? Or someone who's an avid reader of like what's currently popping on Book Talk, which is normally some kind of smut, which is not something I generally read, but how could I ask them questions like that would help maybe bridge the gap between the two of us and find some common ground? And I was thinking, it's like, okay, instead of it just being like, tell me about the book, because I don't care about the book, maybe ask them like, okay, what about, have you read more than one book from them? If so, it seems like it's an author that you really enjoy. What about their writing do you really like? You know, tell me more about their writing style, or tell me more about like why you're drawn to those books. Is it a form of escapism for you, or do you just enjoy the characters? Is it really easy for you to put yourself into that world? If there's someone who read something like, you know, the thriller novels like Dean Koontz or James Patterson or any of those, Sue Grafton, those are like older writers. I don't really know more modern ones. I just am talking about authors I see all the time. They're super prolific and are continuing to still write. It's like, what about those authors and those storylines? Are you someone who can like predict what is going to happen, or are you someone who just likes being surprised and you're surprised in all of their novels? Instead of coming to that wall of we don't read the same thing and kind of being like, like try to figure out talking about reading in a different way, which is something that the Queen was trying to do as well. There was also a very interesting aspect in it where the Queen is discovering authors and realizing that these are people that she met before because she's the Queen of England. And so she had opportunities to meet some really famous authors and just did the niceties. But now that she's read them, she wished she had an opportunity to talk to them more. And then she, at some point, because she's the Queen, has a gathering of authors and ends up discovering that sometimes it's always not the best to meet your heroes, or she feels like she knows these people because she's read a bunch of their books and finds out that the person that she had built in her head that this author could be and be excited about talking about their work is not necessarily the person that's in front of her. And as someone who has met, not necessarily, I do have friends that are authors, but as someone who has met and been in a lot of situations where I've met people of notoriety, they're just people. Most people are just people. So if you just treat them like a person, it's, no, why did the air conditioner have to turn on? Sad. All right, I'm gonna have to finish this thought somewhere else. I thought it would be funny to do a book about the Queen while sitting on a John Deere tractor. I thought that would be hilarious because the John Deere tractor is about as American and common as you could get. But to finish my previous thought is people are just people, and it's just interesting. Think of the Queen having the same human response to meeting her heroes as anybody else would, because there is the government and then there is the Queen, and sometimes those two are not the same person, if that makes sense. There's like the head of state. The compartmentalization was interesting. So Alan Bennett, in such a short little novella about something very silly, still got me to think deeply about reading as a whole and reading in general and how much I love it and how much I could be a better ambassador for it in my day-to-day life, in addition to trying to figure out ways to speak about books with more depth, and also to maybe try to find more ways to bridge gaps between different genres. So I'm really glad I found the little book. You haven't seen it in my hands this entire video because it has already moved on to a new home. I don't keep paperbacks around. Despite me enjoying the book, it has already sold and gone off to a new home. So if you find a copy out in the wild yourself, I do recommend picking it up. I don't necessarily recommend paying the $16 it costs if you get the same little trade paperback I got. Don't worry, I didn't pay that for it, but you know, if you find it at a secondhand shop for under $5 or less, even better, I think it would be a neat little read, especially if you like British culture. I do. I watch a lot of British TV. I've watched a lot of British TV. I love a lot of British history. I studied Egyptology at the British Museum. I do have a lot of love, which is also why I decided to read the book. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye. Bye.